Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This single sentence holds the key to the riddle of spiritual growth and financial struggle. In the depths of our psyche, beyond rational thinking and clever budgeting, lives a tangle of memories, associations, inherited beliefs, and unresolved fear. These unseen energies operating in what Jung called the shadow are not just about repressed anger or shame. They are also the gatekeepers of our sense of worth. And nowhere is this more evident than in our relationship with money. Money in the collective imagination is not just a tool, it is a symbol. It carries the emotional weight of power, freedom, betrayal, suffering, and survival. For many, it is stained with family conflict, scarcity, guilt, and deeply rooted anxiety. It does not matter how conscious your intentions are. If your body associates wealth with danger, your nervous system will reject it. You will procrastinate, undersell, or unconsciously shrink from visibility, not out of laziness, but as a survival reflex. This is not failure. This is psychology. This is spiritual warfare. And most of all, this is your chance to understand what's really going on beneath the surface. When a person begins the process of awakening, of facing their trauma, of untangling the narratives inherited from childhood, they assume life will reward them. More clarity, more peace, and perhaps even more money. But what many discover instead is a disorienting reversal, financial drought. The external world begins to feel increasingly unstable, even as the internal world expands. Why? Carl Jung taught that the unconscious governs far more of our lives than we care to admit. He wasn't speaking only of dreams or symbols, but of the vast realm of forgotten memories, emotional associations, and body-bound responses that operate below the level of awareness. In this shadowy domain, beliefs are not articulated, they are felt. And among the most powerful of these unconscious associations is the one we have with money. To understand this connection, we must descend not upward into aspiration, but downward into the archaeological layers of our psyche. There, we do not find spreadsheets or bank balances. We find something far more potent, the emotional meaning our nervous system has assigned to the idea of wealth. Imagine a child growing up in a household where money was synonymous with tension. Perhaps their parents argued over bills. Perhaps bankruptcy brought embarrassment. Maybe abundance, when it came, was followed by loss, by sudden moves, betrayals, or instability. These aren't mere memories, they're blueprints. The child's nervous system records these moments not as isolated events, but as warnings. Money equals chaos. Money equals pain. Money equals rejection. And so the nervous system does what it was designed to do. It protects. Now that child grows up. They become a seeker. They go to therapy. They sit in stillness. They begin the journey of healing. On a conscious level, they want financial freedom. They set goals. They journal affirmations. But something strange happens. They avoid checking their bank account. They feel guilt when charging for their work. They procrastinate on launching their business. Or they unconsciously sabotage every opportunity that arrives. This is not laziness. This is not lack of discipline. This is trauma. Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." What he meant was that the journey toward integration, toward psychological wholeness, will always bring us into contact with the parts of ourselves we have long ignored, feared, or denied. And in this case, that means confronting our unconscious relationship with money. Most people assume the problem is logical. I just need better budgeting skills. or I should work harder. But the true conflict lies deeper. The unconscious mind is not moved by spreadsheets, it responds to feeling. If your body associates financial success with danger, it will override your goals. If it believes that wealth means separation from your family, abandonment, or vulnerability, it will shut the door before the opportunity ever enters. The irony is painful. You heal to feel free. But the more you heal, the more you become aware of these unseen contracts with survival. The agreement to stay small to be safe. The vow to remain invisible to avoid judgment. The subconscious belief that if you earn too much, you will become like those who once hurt you. This is where many spiritually awakened individuals falter. They assume something has gone wrong. Why am I doing the work but still stuck? The truth is, nothing has gone wrong. What's happening is sacred. The veil is lifting. Your nervous system, which once kept you alive by avoiding risk, is now being asked to update its map. And that process is not intellectual. It is somatic. Your body must learn slowly, gently, that it is safe to expand, that receiving is not betrayal, that joy is not dangerous, that money is not the enemy, but an amplifier of who you truly are. This is why financial healing cannot be separated from emotional and spiritual integration. Because money is never just about money. It is a mirror. It reflects your sense of worth, your boundaries, your ability to receive, your capacity to be seen. And until those unconscious stories are brought to the light, until they are witnessed, felt, and rewritten, they will continue to shape your external reality. Jung would call this the return to the self. Not the egoic self that seeks wealth as a badge of status, but the deeper self that longs to live in alignment with truth. In this context, abundance is not the goal. It is the byproduct of integration. It is what happens when all parts of you wounded child, dreaming adult wise elder come into harmony. This is not about forcing wealth into your life. It is about removing the unconscious blocks that have kept it out. And to do that, you must first name them. What did you learn about money growing up? What stories did your body inherit? What emotional states do you associate with wealth? Do you equate it with loss, guilt, distance from those you love? These questions are not rhetorical. They are invitations. Invitations into the shadow. Because once you see the blueprint, you can begin to change it. Not with force, but with presence, with slowness, with self-compassion, with breath. This is the true path. The spiral path. Not a straight line to success, but a sacred return to the places within you that were never allowed to feel safe. And from there, from that deep embodied safety, something extraordinary begins to happen. Not only do you stop chasing money, you start letting it in. Carl Jung once said, "The individual who wishes to have an answer to the problem of evil as it is posed today has need first and foremost of self-knowledge that is the utmost possible knowledge of their own wholeness." Nowhere is this wisdom more relevant than in our collective relationship with money. We speak of budgets and earnings, investments and income, but rarely do we speak of the psychic wounds passed down through generations, wounds that shape how we see, receive, and resist abundance. To understand our struggles with money, we must look not only within ourselves, but behind ourselves, into the psychological and emotional legacies we inherit without consent. These invisible inheritances form what Jung called the collective unconscious, a vast, interconnected web of archetypes, ancestral memory, and cultural belief systems that influence our inner world from the shadows. Let's begin with a simple yet profound truth. Most of us did not choose our beliefs about money. We absorbed them. Like secondhand smoke, they seeped into our nervous systems long before we had the consciousness to question them. We heard phrases like, "Money doesn't grow on trees," or "Rich people are greedy," not once, but countless times, until these words became emotional truths. Not facts, but felt realities. And what's more, many of these imprints were not formed in our lifetimes. Consider the ancestral story. Perhaps your grandparents survived war, famine, political upheaval, or economic depression. For them, money wasn't an energetic flow, it was survival. They didn't have the luxury to contemplate manifestation or prosperity. They hustled. They rationed. They suffered. And in doing so, they formed a deep bond with lack. A bond built on fear, vigilance, and emotional restraint. Now imagine those experiences being passed down not through stories alone, but through behavior, through body language, through the unspoken emotional climate of your home. If they saw wealth as dangerous, if they felt betrayal around abundance, if they viewed prosperity as fleeting or corrupt, those associations became a psychic inheritance, one that may now live inside you. This is the shadow behind scarcity, not mere financial ignorance, but a generational wound. And the most insidious part. This inheritance is often invisible. You may not remember anyone saying that money was evil or that you were unworthy of abundance. But the emotional tone of your childhood, how money was discussed, how it was fought over, feared, or fetishized, left imprints. These imprints became neural pathways, and those pathways became patterns. So now, when adult you attempts to create wealth to launch a business, ask for a raised charge what you're worth, another part of you flinches, contracts, retreats, a child part, an inherited voice, a reflexive nervous system response saying, "This isn't safe. This isn't who we are. This isn't allowed." This is where Jung's shadow work becomes more than a theory. It becomes a path to freedom. Because the shadow is not only where we hide our shame, fear, or rage, it's also where we hide our power, our potential, our capacity to receive. That includes money. Many people assume the shadow is dark in nature, but Jung insisted the shadow can also hold light that we were never permitted to express. Gifts that went unacknowledged, desires that were labeled selfish, confidence that was punished. So what happens when financial abundance lives in your shadow? You fear shining. You feel guilty for wanting more. You sabotage moments of expansion, not because you're unmotivated, but because your unconscious still believes wealth will cost you love, belonging, or safety. And your psyche will always choose safety over success if the two feel incompatible. This is the true cost of unexamined money wounds, not just missed income, but missed integration. To reclaim abundance, you must first reclaim the parts of you that were exiled when you first learned it wasn't safe to receive. This work is not fast, it is not linear, but it is sacred. Begin by tracing your lineage. Ask yourself, what did my parents believe about money? What emotions did I feel in the room when finances were discussed? What roles did I unconsciously adopt? The saver, the self-sacrificer, the rebel, who in my family thrived and who resented them for it. These aren't just journal prompts, they are mirrors. They help you uncover the silent vows you've taken. Vows like, I will never be like them. I must stay small to be accepted. If I succeed, I'll be alone. Once you see these vows, you can choose again, not with judgment, but with compassion. Jung believed that true healing happens not through suppression, but through integration. The goal is not to destroy the old story, but to bring it into the light and rewrite it. To say, yes, they suffered, but I choose differently. To honor the pain of those who came before you while refusing to repeat it. This is not betrayal, it is evolution. So when you feel the pull of shame as money enters your life, when you hear the ancestral voice whisper, "Be careful, it won't last," when you feel yourself shrinking before asking for what you're worth, pause, breathe, and say to yourself, "This story ends with me," because it can. You are the bridge between generations. You are the pattern breaker. You are the author of a new narrative. A narrative where wealth is no longer a threat, where receiving is not selfish, but sacred, where your spiritual growth and financial well-being are not enemies, but allies, integrated, whole, and free. Carl Jung often warned us that the greatest threats to our transformation do not come from the world outside, but from within, hidden in the invisible contracts we make with ourselves in childhood. These contracts, once formed, are fiercely guarded by the body, particularly the nervous system, which acts as the sentinel of our survival. And when it comes to money, this inner sentinel may be doing far more than we consciously realize. By the time most people seek financial healing, they have already blamed themselves. They have called themselves lazy, inconsistent, unmotivated. They've been told to just try harder, be more disciplined, or get serious. But such advice ignores the deeper truth one Jung would have insisted upon: we are not entirely rational beings. We are creatures of experience, and the nervous system does not follow logic, it follows memory. Let us be clear, your difficulty with money may not stem from a lack of effort, but from a body conditioned to associate growth with danger. Consider this: if your childhood experience taught your nervous system that visibility led to punishment, success to envy, or having needs to rejection, then any present-day movement toward financial abundance may trigger an old alarm. You might not hear a siren, but the signs are there: fatigue, procrastination, forgetfulness, shutdown. These are not flaws. They are defense mechanisms, symptoms of unresolved somatic memory. This is what Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." When your nervous system has cataloged money as unsafe, your body will unconsciously pull you back into familiar patterns of scarcity, not to harm you, but to protect you. And so we enter the paradox. You meditate, affirm, and visualize. You set goals and intentions, yet somehow you forget to follow up on a big opportunity. You undercharge. You avoid looking at your bank account, or you work hard for weeks only to collapse into exhaustion when success is near. Sound familiar? This isn't self-sabotage. It's self-protection and internal loyalty to the familiar, even when the familiar is toxic. Jung referred to this as the battle between the ego and the self. The ego, the personality we construct to survive, wants to stay in known territory. It says, "At least here we understand the rules." But the self, the deeper intelligence of wholeness, calls us toward integration, healing, and expansion. That calling, however, often feels terrifying to the parts of us still rooted in survival. Here lies the crux of the issue: we assume progress should feel good. We imagine that healing will bring lightness, that wealth will feel like joy. But for many, growth first feels like grief. Joy feels unsafe. Rest feels undeserved. Abundance feels suspicious. Not because we are broken, but because our bodies have never learned that it's safe to feel good. This is why we must stop labeling our inertia as laziness. What looks like procrastination may in fact be a trauma response. What we call being stuck may be the body saying, "I don't yet know how to exist in this new level of safety." You see, your nervous system isn't interested in your dreams. It is interested in predictability, even if that predictability is painful. This is why people often return to old partners, old jobs, or old financial habits. Not because they're foolish, but because it feels familiar. And in trauma, familiar equals safe. Healing then requires more than mindset. It requires rewiring. This is where modern somatic practices become essential companions to Jungian shadow work. Because no matter how many affirmations you recite, if your body flinches when you receive a large payment, or panic arises when you imagine quitting your job, the nervous system will overrule the intellect. You must learn gradually to teach your body a new truth. Practices like breath work, conscious rest, inner child work, and somatic tracking aren't luxuries. They are the very tools that allow the body to settle into safety. They create the conditions for the new normal, a life where expansion doesn't automatically signal threat. But this requires patience. It requires compassion. Jung wrote that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. Your ambition and your fear are not enemies. They are parts of the same psyche, longing to be seen understood, and ultimately unified. You do not overcome the nervous system's resistance by force. You outgrow it through relationship. You listen to the voice that says, "This is too much," and you answer gently, "I know, and I'm not abandoning you." You bring safety where there was fear, tenderness where there was shame. That is the work. Because when the body begins to trust that abundance won't cost it everything, when success no longer feels like exile, when visibility doesn't translate to attack, a shift begins to happen. The resistance softens. The protective walls relax. The unconscious begins to cooperate with the conscious intention. This is not just financial progress, it is psycho-spiritual transformation. It is not about chasing wealth. It is about becoming a person who can hold it without fear. And perhaps that's the real gift. Not the money itself, but the liberation from the old programming that said you had to earn your worth through suffering, that you had to hustle to deserve rest, that joy must always be paid for in guilt. The body remembers, but so does the soul. And what you are remembering now is that abundance is not a reward for perfection. It is the natural outcome of integration. Carl Jung taught that the path to individuation, the process of becoming whole, is not a climb, but a spiral. We revisit the same wounds, the same patterns, not to suffer them again, but to see them with new eyes. Nowhere is this spiral more misunderstood than in our relationship with money. We believe financial struggle means something is broken. But perhaps, as Jung would suggest, it is instead a signal that a deeper layer of self is emerging, and with it, an invitation to integrate what has long been split. Let us speak plainly. Many people on the spiritual path still carry the belief that abundance and authenticity are incompatible, that to prosper is to compromise, that to receive is to risk betrayal of family, of values, of self. These beliefs are rarely conscious. They are housed in the nervous system, rooted in the shadow, and often cloaked in virtue. You may tell yourself, "I don't need much," or "I'm not in it for the money." These may sound noble, even enlightened. But beneath these declarations, there may be something else: fear of visibility, guilt about thriving, or an inherited story that says suffering is spiritual and wealth is worldly. This is not humility. It is fragmentation, a psyche divided between what it desires and what it feels safe to allow. Jung would have called this a split between the ego and the self. The ego says, if I stay small, I stay safe. The self whispers, you were made to expand. And in the middle is the soul aching for reunion. What we must understand is that abundance is not about accumulation, it is about alignment. When the parts of us that fear wealth are brought into dialogue with the parts that seek it, something profound happens. Not a transaction, but a transformation. Suddenly, money is no longer the pursuit of the ego, but the byproduct of integration. Not something we force, but something we allow. This inner shift cannot be faked. The universe, much like the psyche, responds not to words, but to vibration, the energy we carry beneath the surface. And if our inner world is still governed by unworthiness, hypervigilance, or scarcity, we will unconsciously filter out the very opportunities that could elevate us. Not because we're weak, but because our nervous system still equates expansion with danger. Here is where we turn the key. You do not have to work harder. You have to feel safer. Not in the future, right now, in the body you live in. Your nervous system must learn that it is safe to rest, safe to receive, safe to ask, safe to succeed. These are not affirmations. They are experiences, and they must be repeated slowly and consistently until they replace the old patterns of fear. This is why budgeting apps and hustle culture often fail the spiritually awakened. They speak only to the conscious mind, ignoring the unconscious terrain that governs over 90% of our behavior. They tell us what to do, but not how to be with what we feel. And it is what we feel, not what we think, that determines whether we allow abundance in. To change your relationship with money, you must change your relationship with yourself. You must learn to notice when you shrink before receiving, when you over-explain your prices, when you say yes to unpaid labor, when you apologize for taking up space. These are not merely bad habits, they are old protections. And they cannot be shamed into submission, they must be brought into the light and reparented. Jung once wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. If you want to grow your wealth, don't start with your goals. Start with your resistance. Start with the part of you that flinches when abundance knocks at the door. Sit with it. Breathe with it. Ask what it's afraid of. Ask what it needs. You may find that it's not money you're afraid of, but change, attention, responsibility, or perhaps the grief of outgrowing the people and places that once felt like home. This is real work, not the kind that earns applause, but the kind that earns freedom. Because the final threshold of healing is not pain, it is permission. Permission to thrive, to shine, to receive not just in theory, but in reality. And here's the great irony: many people believe they need money to feel safe, but in truth, it is safety that allows money to flow. When your nervous system believes you are safe to hold more joy, more connection, more resources, it stops blocking abundance. The same actions begin to yield different results. Your energy changes, and so do your outcomes. Not because you became someone else, but because you finally became all of yourself. The path to abundance, then, is not external, it is internal. And it does not begin with a hustle. It begins with a pause, with a breath, with the sacred decision to befriend the parts of you that once only knew survival. Because when you do, something opens. A new frequency, a new story, a new chapter in which you no longer chase worth, but live from it. This is not magic. It is integration. And in that integration, abundance is no longer something you pursue. It becomes who you are. Carl Jung believed that the greatest privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who the world told you to be, not who your family needed you to become for their comfort, but the whole integrated self-shadow and light fear and courage contraction and expansion. And perhaps now, as we reach the end of this spiral journey together, we can finally see what this was never about. It was never about money alone. It was about memory, about meaning, about survival instincts etched into the body and ancestral grief passed through blood. You were not failing to earn. You were obeying an inner contract that said abundance was not safe. You were following a script that predates your conscious mind. But here's the revelation: you are the one who can choose to stop repeating it, not by rejecting your past, but by reintegrating it, not by proving your worth, but by remembering it. Healing is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the fear began, before you were taught that joy must be earned, that wealth must hurt, or that visibility equals danger. You have already done the hardest part. You've survived. You've awakened. You've dared to question everything that once felt like law. And now the next step is not to run harder, but to rest deeper, to trust your nervous system can learn new truths, that receiving can feel safe. That ease does not make you weak, it makes you ready. You are not broken. You are becoming. So when you catch yourself shrinking at the thought of success, when you hesitate to raise your rates, ask for help, or believe that good things can come without suffering, remember, those reflexes are echoes, not prophecies. They do not define your future. They simply point to the parts of you still waiting for integration. This is where real change begins. Not in the spreadsheets or the side hustles, but in the quiet spaces where you look at your shadow and say, "You are safe now." We no longer have to be at war with abundance. Because real abundance does not chase. It arrives where it feels welcomed. It settles where it feels safe. And it stays where it is not shamed. Let this be your new practice, not just healing the pain, but learning to receive the joy. Not just surviving scarcity, but living in sufficiency. Not just dismantling what hurt, but building what heals. Your financial peace is not a luxury. It is a sacred restoration of what has always belonged to you. Your worth, your voice, your right to have to hold and to thrive without guilt. So now we return to Jung's wisdom one last time. You do not attract what you want. You attract what you are. And you, dear viewer, are no longer a vessel of lack. You are the threshold where the old story ends and the new one begins. If this message stirred something in you, if you felt seen, understood, or simply less alone, I invite you to anchor that feeling. Leave a comment below and write, "I am safe to receive." Let it be your declaration to yourself, to this community, and to the lineage you're healing. And if you haven't already subscribed my channel where we dive deep into the truths that most people avoid, but your soul remembers. Every week, we bring you more insight, more clarity, and more tools to help you not just think differently, but live differently. Because this journey isn't about becoming rich. It's about becoming whole. And wholeness, my friend, is the greatest wealth of all.